Shedding blood would be the greatest evil to stain Georgian history. It's unimaginable that something like this would ever cross Shevardnadze's mind. Something like going to Germany after stepping down as the country's president and calling in favors to be appointed as some German region's chancellor or foreign minister, for example. Never. I have no intention of becoming minister, and let me tell you something. I'm not going to idle around either. If anyone, a ruling bloc, government, or anybody else, needs my counsel, I will do it free of charge. And I'm talking about real, hardcore counseling. How about serving as Speaker of Parliament? Oh no, I'm too old to be Speaker of Parliament. We have a good speaker. Cherish it. I still think that external factors and assistance played a major role in staging a wave of revolutions in the post-Soviet countries, and they snowballed to extend far beyond Georgia. All this talk about the Rose Revolution, what else is out there? The Velvet Revolution, all right? But maybe a cabbage revolution? What's next? The whole idea of these so-called revolutions is to force the president out. A violent power grab is the only possible legal definition of what happened. Now, some may get offended, but it was a clear case of adventurism. We only used peaceful methods, defensive means to protect state institutions. But they stormed these institutions and took them by force, a crime defined in the criminal code. It was a textbook coup d'etat. No, it was not a coup, which has different characteristics. Instead, it was a revolution for sure. This was no Rose Revolution. This was a typical palace coup. And this revolution offered the country a serious chance, which was never used. Because of the overwhelming electoral fraud in the November 2, 2003 elections, the peaceful protest rallies of citizens prevented the recognition of the parliament's authority. Consequently, pursuant to Georgia's applicable legislation, the authority defined in the Constitution in Georgia shall be exercised by the 1999 Parliament of Georgia. As soon as the newly elected parliament convenes, as prescribed by the only relevant legislative provision, the previous parliament is dissolved, period. It is dissolved. But they continued, trampling everything underfoot. On the third day after the parliament's takeover, I turned the TV on to watch the news. Debates on possible electoral fraud were in full swing in the Assembly Hall of the Supreme Court. I could not believe my eyes. The issue fell under the purview of the Constitutional Court. Only the Constitutional Court was authorized to decide whether or not the elections were stolen. Johnny Krtsanisi and I were among the initiators. Two types of elections, proportional and majoritarian, were held on the same day. And to that, the referendum on reducing the size of the parliament from 235 to 150 members. The relevant court sessions drew a strange picture. The referendum was spotless, free of any fraud whatsoever, with most voters supporting the parliament's reduction to 150 members. Equally flawless and legitimate were the majoritarian elections, and the only rigged component of this voting happened to be proportional. All right, but how do you rig one ballot next to two perfectly legitimate ballots inside the same envelope? This will forever remain a riddle, wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. My question is, what kind of justice is it? If one is fraudulent, why aren't the others? This violation applies to the whole package, right? How can you slam one thing as fraudulent and praise the other two as perfect? It was the right, pragmatic step at that time. Legally, totally absurd and nonsensical, I agree, but certainly a chance to strike a balance, as I believed back then. Legally, the results of those elections have not been voided to this day. That's my point. Even though I was a member of that so-called revolutionary triumvirate, revolutions always frightened me. I never was their advocate. I always said that we needed revolutionary changes, not a revolution per se. We need evolution, not revolution. And I was perfectly aware of the serious problems possibly arising from Saakashvili's and the national movement's uncontrolled rule. Georgians, Aslan is fled. Hachara is liberated. In reality, something very simple happened. Shevardnadze's team claimed victory in the election's majoritarian component because they had bigger names in their party. Without Saakashvili, on the other hand, there were just a handful of recognizable faces, and even those known to a limited circle. Saakashvili, now coming across as a victorious revolutionary, could secure all parliamentary seats for the national movement if he had to hold fresh majoritarian elections, explaining why, after a series of conflicts and eventual deals within the group, the proportional elections were abolished, validating only the majoritarian voting's results. I do not want the parliament to comprise only of the national movement. I wanted those elected through majoritarian voting to stay, because some of them, not that I'm saying that they were perfect, but some of them were mature, experienced people. I was hoping that they could put to use their weight and experience to strike a balance in the parliament between the emotionally charged, revolutionary national movement and the rest of us. But I was dead wrong. In just a couple of months, almost all of them crossed the aisle and were taken by the national movement and Saakashvili under their wing. I am convinced that he didn't expect Shevardnadze to betray him. I don't think he did, because he believed in Shevardnadze's sound judgment. He knew that Shevardnadze understood what was at stake. But Shevardnadze did not expect what happened either. That's why he ended up being second, not first. Shevardnadze was smart enough to make sure that he was at the helm at the end of the day. If he wanted to, he would. But during the so-called Rose Revolution period, Shevardnadze practically lost power. It took a heavy emotional toll on me. Many people rejoiced, but I was not happy about it, because I knew that a very difficult period in the country's life was about to begin. As a human being, I found it hard to handle, because I absolutely had to take the initiative and say what I had to say. But it was so hard to do. Importantly, we must have one presidential candidate, and we have agreed that this presidential candidate is Mr. Mikhail Saakashvili. ვფიქრობდი იმას, რომ მე და ჟვანია შევძლებდით სააკაშვილის, არ მინდა სიტყვა გაკონტროლება გამოვიყენო, მაგრამ ყოველ შემთხვევაში კორექტირებას, ესე ვთქვათ. I thought that Shevardnadze and I would be able to put Saakashvili right, so to speak. I'd rather not use the word control. I thought it was possible, and I was hoping that it would benefit the country. Unfortunately, though, Shevardnadze decided to prove to Saakashvili that he was not going to double-cross him, that he was a loyal supporter, leaving no room for a third wheel. Practically the day after we nominated Saakashvili for president, they started a game of their own. I think it was Shevardnadze's fateful mistake.
ჟვანიას მიმართ
He was loyal to Shevardnadze to the very end. Strange, isn't it? Loyal to the very end? I don't remember him saying a single bad word about Shevardnadze in interviews with us, even after the resignation. Generally, without Shevardnadze joining the team, things could have taken a different turn, and he might have become the country's next leader. Zurab Shevardnadze was my closest longtime associate, and I really trusted him. But after the misunderstanding, we drifted apart. I don't think it benefited either of us. He singled out Shevardnadze as someone likely to come into power after him. Shevardnadze would not be elected president, but he could serve as prime minister from the ruling party in a parliamentary system. It's just that Saakashvili was quick to ride the wave of revolution. I think Shevardnadze was expecting Shevardnadze to take over, if not immediately, at least in a couple of years after the expiration of Shevardnadze's term. But things got out of control, out of Shevardnadze's control, not Shevardnadze's control, because this process was not of Shevardnadze's own making. As for the rest, such as Ms. Burjanadze, I don't know who else I should list as presidential candidates. We're not on friendly terms, never were.
Some leaders revoluțiისას ჩვენ მქონდა უნიკალური შანსი.
We, the three leaders of the revolution, had a unique chance. I remember one of our meetings. There were just the three of us. I said, God has given us everything. We are young, and we have enormous support both in Georgia and abroad. We hold the three top positions in the country, and if we fail to take advantage and instead waste it all on quarreling, God will never forgive us. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened.
სამწუხაროდ მოხდა ისე როგორც მოხდა.
People must come clean with themselves and answer this question. Whose interests did Shevardnadze's removal from power serve?
ესეთი კითხვა არსებობს, ხო? რომ რითი გვაჯობეს? გვაჯობეს ერთადერთი რამის გამო, რომ ისინი ამ ქვეყნეს.
How did they overpower us? They overpowered us because of one thing, and one thing only. They never tied their own future and the future of their children to the future of the country. Their future had nothing in common with the country's future. Unlike us, they could stoop. Well, it's like in the Caucasian chalk circle. You let go of your beloved. I asked him afterwards, why didn't you do it? You know what? He replied, this whole country is not worth the life of one mother or mother-to-be. If I listened to you, you would unleash like 300 psychos. They would rip one another to pieces, and corpses would fill Rustaveli Avenue. Was it worth it? And he concluded by saying, you think you're wise, and Shevardnadze has gone senile, don't you?
I
want to ask them, don't get overconfident. Be careful, be watchful, and maximally take into account the population, the people. Our people were in need when I was at the helm, and they are in need today. Popular attitudes are shaped by the way workers live. Pay greater attention to democracy. Any limitations to democracy, in any form, are unacceptable. If there's anything I am proud of, it is the fact that, in the course of 10 years, I managed to build Georgian democracy.
10 წლის განმავლობაში საქართველოში მე შექმნილი ქართული დემოკრატია.
პრეზიდენტი, რომელიც მოვიდა საბჭოთა პერიოდიდან. ანუ ადამიანი, რომელიც
A person with his roots in the Soviet era, someone who had served as first secretary of the Communist Party's Central Committee and then as Soviet foreign minister, proved far more democratic as a president than the one after him, a president elected through a democratic revolution. That's a fact because at that time, democratic institutions operated absolutely freely. There were media outlets, NGOs, and the same parliament for one.
თავისუფლად იყო ეს მედია, იყო ეს არასამთავრობო ორგანიზაციები, თუ თუნდაც პარლამენტი.
They must understand that they are the ones in need of democracy. What is democracy? Democracy is a medicine, a healer that helps you not turn into a dictator. That period brings to mind these words from the Caucasian chalk circle, almost an age of justice. That's exactly what that period was. Everyone thought that it was an irreversible process, and no one could have imagined that after the freedom, tens of thousands would end up behind bars, in the prison system, on probation. Hundreds would be killed by law enforcement in the streets. Media would be raided. People dropped their guard, believing that things would never change, never ever. Unfortunately, processes in the wake of the revolution took shape much the way any revolution inevitably takes. Speaking of, a revolution is nothing but a triumphant riot. What's your advice for the new president, Mr. Shevardnadze? Speak one at a time, please. What's your advice for the new president, Mr. Shevardnadze? Work hard, talk less, and keep your shoulder to the wheel. Politics is not just about coming, but also about leaving.
Shaping
policy and state development takes longer than 5 or even 10 years. It takes time and distance. We are more than one generation away from fully assessing all this. We are just participants, and that's the only reason why our opinions and visions matter. As for evaluation, no matter what we say today, it will be different in the future. I will live to see the people say that Georgia had a president, not necessarily a great one or godlike, but a president who took charge over a country in shambles, brother against brother, and he started from scratch. And now, we are a state, and more will be accomplished tomorrow. The same projects I mentioned, projects that I bled for.
დღეს როცა ჩვენ ვაპარაკობთ დიდ პროექტებზე, ყველანი ვართ ამისი მოწმე, რომ ეს ყველაფერი ეს დიდი
As we are talking about big projects today, we all can see that these globally important and acknowledged endeavors started under Shevardnadze, but perceptions got somehow twisted down the road, and under the influence of this propaganda, people tend to believe that reforms started in 2003. But we know that the country is becoming part of the world, and these major projects took place under Shevardnadze and should be credited to him. If anything, the words, "I am Georgian and therefore I am European," were pronounced when Shevardnadze was at the helm. And this says it all. I hope that they will make use and continue what has been done so far. The stage is set.
A
lot of both commending and critical words can be said, but everything linked to the same pipeline projects and the country's transit function Here, Shevardnadze takes all the credit, and I think Shevardnadze was the only one up to the task. It's kind of disappointing when you're appreciated abroad more than in your own country. Propaganda has somehow downplayed his role. It seems that their master plan was just to erase that period altogether. I was so worried after his resignation, and after this campaign against him snowballed, I was afraid that he would be arrested. Things were sort of going in that direction, and I was really worried, not as a journalist, but as a human being. Not because Shevardnadze was my interviewee, but because we had developed human bonds. Journalists come to visit me and talk to me, even though some people tell them, leave that house alone, don't go there. But they're still coming here. And I learn a lot from them. Even if they stop coming, I read the papers, don't I? And I compare what was before and what is now. I watch TV shows, don't I? What was okay to say and what was not. When there are limitations, like you can say this, but not that. This is no longer democracy. Besides being action-oriented, a politician must also be resolute, committed, and magnanimous, because magnanimity pays off. Now he's talking about being rough, about repressions, and stuff like that. Well, it may sound all right for a month or two, without arousing protest, but as time goes on, it becomes harder and harder to handle. If he resorts to repressions, people will not put up with it. It is vital for a politician to have the kind of backing Shevardnadze enjoyed from his wife. There was some outdoor reception and they were standing together. I said, Mr. Shevardnadze. What, an interview? Not with you, with Nanuli. All righty, he replied, and stepped back. I'm totally clueless when it comes to choosing presents. I just can't do it. I'm horrible at choosing presents, including for my wife. I haven't bought her anything yet, but I'll figure something out. Once I caught a glimpse of how Mr. Shevardnadze looked at Nanuli, and it captivated my attention. He looked at her with so much love in his eyes, something you rarely find, even among young people. Come down here, please. Come down? No, it's just that you're scaring us from up there. The eyes of an enamored young man were glowing with love under Mr. Shevardnadze's gray hair. Mother's factor, when she was seriously ill in her final couple of years, took a heavy toll on Dad's disposition and spirit in general.
He took
Nanuli's ailment close to heart. It got the best of him. One of the reasons why he wouldn't put up a fight, especially at a later period. Mom was his firm supporter. I've seen Dad lose heart in certain situations. It happens to everyone. It may be a momentary lapse, but everyone feels once in a while that they just can't go on. But Mom, she always stood by him, and I'm talking about their entire life together, not the later events. She stood by his side and encouraged him. No, Edo, we must be strong. We must press on. Mom was a real fighter. They had a difficult life. It's only on the surface that it seems like, okay, here's a president, and here's a president's wife, and what a wonderful life they must have. Nanuli's ailment pushed Eduard Shevardnadze toward giving up on everything. He just couldn't go on without her, and that's exactly what happened. After grandmother's death, grandfather was visibly on the gradual decline because of losing his better half. In times of grief and mourning over the newly departed, even enemies extend their condolences. It's in our blood, enshrined in our traditions, to offer your sympathy. Even Misha visited us. He attended the viewing, but there were many others who couldn't make it. They must have been scared, and for good reason. At that time, we probably didn't fully appreciate how dangerous it was to associate with Shevardnadze and his family. Mr. Krtsanisi came to the viewing, as we expected, and we were happy about it. As happy as one can be under the circumstances. As we learned later, he was arrested just after he left our residence. Krtsanisi was one person who remained loyal to Mr. Shevardnadze to the very end, something they just couldn't let slide. They also couldn't forgive him for the conversation he had with Saakashvili that day. What attracted me most was his attitude towards his family, the way he loved his wife, children, grandchildren. The sanctity of family was what he cherished to the highest degree, a quality missing these days. His stepping down gave rise to a different kind of relationship, closer and more open. My relationship with Babu can be divided into two parts, during his presidency and after his resignation. Unfortunately, given his busy schedule, his contact with the rest of the family throughout the first period was quite limited. My acquaintance with grandfather started in earnest after his resignation. It was a sheer delight going up to Krtsanisi in the afternoon, dining and discussing the events of the 1980s and history in general over a cup of green tea or a snifter of cognac. Babu was warm, laid back, and sometimes even reserved. For me personally, and Tamuna will probably agree, he became a true grandfather, a grandfather genuinely interested in my personal life and career, only after his resignation. He called, asked questions, and complained if I didn't visit him to tell him everything. What a grandfather is expected to do, he did in the last 10 years of his life. And I'm really happy that we had these 10 years to have Babu just for ourselves. And then there was Babu, a friend he dropped by to see, sometimes for lunch, to chat, and so on. Our relationship evolved into something very exciting. It was then that I got to embrace many things I lacked before. He told me many things. He had enough time. And he also asked me about many things, things that probably would never have crossed his mind before. And I replied, naturally we talked about life and politics, of course, this and that. Now he had all the time in the world for his family, children, grandchildren. His Holiness often visited us. They would sit and talk. Long live our pride and joy, the nation's shepherd and spiritual father, His Holiness. I should bless you first. I implore God to grant you a sweet and contented life, and most importantly, to live to see a unified and jubilant Georgia. It's bound to happen. Thank you. His Holiness called me in and said, "You must bring Holy Communion to Mr. Shevardnadze." I was caught by surprise. I had the liturgy to serve, and I didn't know back then that a church operated at his residence. When I arrived to serve, and I had a habit of arriving an hour earlier, I found Mr. Shevardnadze all dressed up. After I greeted him, he told me, "Father Shalva, I want you to hear my confession. I don't want to commune without it." We entered one of the rooms and spoke for about 30 minutes. That day, he had visitors, his grandchildren Sophie and Shalva, and they all attended the liturgy. After the service, they took some pictures. I felt sheepish, but Mr. Shevardnadze came to the rescue. "Father Shalva," he called me, "why don't you take a picture with us? You may find it useful here, and I'll need it up there." Happy birthday. Are you feeling all right? He happened to live in an area where it was hard for people to find religion. It was hard because people's mentality was different then. They grew up in a different environment, with different attitudes, and their mindsets were different too. Imagine the environment and people of his time. And it's very difficult for someone who grew up in that period to change his ways, become church-going, to confess and request Holy Communion. There are things I regret, of course, but not resigning. What I regret most involves Abkhazia, that I haven't been able to return Abkhazia and solve the Georgian-Ossetian conflict. This causes me the deepest regrets and heartbreak. After resignation, he wasn't in perfect shape, and on my way to visit him, I couldn't help thinking, what if it's not the Shevardnadze I knew? Well, I couldn't tell the difference when I saw him. I was just as composed and collected as before. On second thought, there was no need to be that way, right? He was a civilian now. It may seem that I could afford being a little facetious, but the energy he radiated was still there, as strong as ever. He followed his daily routine, schedule, until the very end. That's the way he was, and he couldn't do otherwise. I'm not sure it was good for him in his condition, but he worked really hard, reading on end, writing a lot, for as long as he could, of course. And he also had his appointed visiting days and hours. He gave many interviews, especially when something big happened in the world. The phone ringing off the hook, people trying to get a hold of him. His most frequent guests included ambassadors from the United Kingdom, Germany, Iran, and of course the United States. They all made sure to see him at the beginning and end of their tenures.
They ask that we pass on to you their extremely high regards and from the president that he wanted to send to you.
This is the president's letter to you.
And we'll see. I think Mr. Shevardnadze may go down at some.
Yes, Shevardnadze is the best. He's more acceptable than the others. Once in a while, I get in touch with Zurab, because I'm used to communicating with him. Not that we're having frank conversations every day, though. No, they don't seek my counsel, my advice. Not on a regular basis. Not at this point, at least. Maybe in the future they will. And if they do, it'll be good. If not, it won't hurt me or them in any way. Scores of representatives of international organizations, and not one or two, whole delegations would come.
How are you?
Not bad. Any change of government, even if someone better, incomparably better comes to power, is always hard and takes its toll. I wish you happiness. Thank you.
But you must just bring it there.
Sure. No, not wrong. No, I can't. But you get full of beautiful things here.
Yes.
Okay, don't come down. Don't come down. Just take this. Okay.
My regards to our friends in the EU.
To our friends in the European Union.
All our common friends.
Come visit for 1, 2, 3 days at your convenience.
For 2 or 3 days at least.
Okay, we'll talk.
Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers of the November 21st, 2003 coup. Without it, this book would never see the light of day. A blessing in disguise, as the wise Georgians would say.
ხანდახან კიდეც უნდა წაიბორძიგო და წაიბორძიგებ კიდეც. მაგრამ ისე არა რომ სულ ბორძიგში იყო.
A person can stumble once in a while, and you will stumble sooner or later. It's normal, but you can't stumble all the time. You stumble once, then you must learn your lesson. I think they are smart, wise, intelligent enough to learn it. I really want to believe this. Now, some of them think that I rejoice when something bad happens, but that would make me an enemy of my own people, an enemy of my own children, and that's not true. Their every success is my success too, even though I have no part in their successes. And their failures, every time they stumble, are my personal failures, for which I am to blame. I know he was happy to host those who used to call him an enemy. Did La Fontaine and Schroeder get along? They were friends, good friends, best friends. We used to work together. One was Secretary General, and the other was future Prime Minister, and so on and so forth. But then whatever happened, happened. I can't say that one is bad and the other is good, but it was bound to happen. We're only human. They were different, and apparently, as they matured, they decided to work more independently, or something may have upset them. We even argued a few times, but I wouldn't say there was enmity between us. Zvanya came recently. We met and spoke, a normal conversation. He was unbelievably forgiving. Frankly, I would get angry sometimes. How can you talk to him after everything we heard and saw from him? No, he wouldn't listen. Period. No, I can't answer this question because I can't list who betrayed me and who didn't, who stayed with me and who didn't. People have themselves, their families to take care of. When a president leaves on his own, you can't tell your colleagues, I'm leaving, but you stay, and be loyal to me. That's not how it works. Now, there's a new government, and they should work with this new government. He welcomed many people with exceptional warmth, gentleness, empathy, and hugs. Trust me, those pretending to be Shevardnadze's enemies later came back to Krtsanisi as friends.
გიორგი ხდებოდა თითქმის აი ყველა წევრის შემდეგ ის იცვლებოდა დამოკიდებულება მის ძალიან იცვლებოდა ბოლოს თითქმის
Each time I visited him, I found a different Georgi. He transformed after each liturgy, and so did his attitude. Towards the end, he delved into the Gospels. I often noticed a copy of the New Testament on his desk. I saw him as a different person, in a different light. I was born and raised in Samogrelo, and Mr. Shevardnadze used to embody everything bad in my childhood. Everything negative in my life was tied to his name. But that's until I met him in person. These later years opened my eyes and helped me see things from a different angle. I never saw him sit during communion. Later, he, already bedridden, would sit up. I visited him a few days before his death. I remember him grab a blanket. He didn't want to be seen naked, not even the shoulders. He was so modest and respectful. Those 10 years until he succumbed to illness were years of happiness. He had amazingly expressive eyes. Toward the end, he spoke to us with his eyes, and he told us a lot with his eyes. That's how he communicated. He never lost his sense of humor. I remember one episode. He can't really talk anymore, but he's trying to tell me something. What? I ask him. He's trying to say something. What? I ask again. Then, in an attempt to figure out what he's trying to say, I suggest something totally outlandish, believing that my guess is dead on. But he just cracks up, laughing uproariously. I asked him once, Dad, is something bothering you? You don't have a fever, I know, but something seems to be bothering you. I was really concerned. He looked up at me, laughing. What's bothering you? I asked. My wit, he replied. If someone has been put through every circle of heaven and hell, it must be Shevardnadze. No matter what, my people and I went through one of the most difficult periods in the history of Georgia. Unfortunately, we Georgians have a short memory. We forget prominent figures fast. We may mention them as someone in the past, or not mention them at all, but we have no right to do that, because we make history. If Georgia is looking to Europe today, Mr. Shevardnadze takes all the credit, of course. Back in his time, David the Builder was the most unpopular Georgian king. But today, well, you know, the same goes for Georgi the Brilliant. Time puts everything into place. In due course, Georgia will surely come to appreciate Shevardnadze's worth.
21 საუკუნე და შემდეგი ათასლეული ბედნიერების მომტანი იქნება ადამიანებისათვის. The
21st century and the next millennium will bring happiness to humanity as long as politicians, statesmen, and ordinary citizens learn a new way of thinking. New thinking does not belong to one era or another. New thinking must be inherently characteristic of politicians in every era. I appeal to my posterity, the youth of the 21st and subsequent centuries. Never forget this truth.
განსაკუთრებული სიმამაცე, გაბედულება მას ყოველთვის ახასიათებდა და აი ამ
his keen intelligence and foresight, in combination with his usual courage and tenacity, have shaped what is known today throughout the world as Shevardnadze's phenomena. His neutral attitude towards human temptations made a lasting impression on me, and his strong will, unbelievable patience, and intuition.
და მოთმინების უნარი, რაღაც გასაოცარი მოთმინების უნარი, ინტუიცია,
integrity, deep-rooted principles, foresight, nobleness, forgiveness, and true love of a human being. Warm, courageous, complex, attentive, sympathetic. For me, he was a great persona. For me, he was Babu. And I believe that when people depart, they don't really leave us, but remain with us forever. For me personally, my grandfather's most prominent feature was his ability to retain his humanity in any situation. Human, personal greatness was his constant companion, both in politics and afterwards. People in my line of work are often asked if it's worth putting your life on the line to protect someone else's. Let me tell you that Mr. Shevardnadze was one person certainly worth laying down my life for. Your country's independence is a happiness that comes at a price. And when the time comes, I believe my people will acknowledge my modest contribution to this happiness.